Some men drink to forget. I just stopped talking. I had my reasons. I used to talk too much. Before the war. Before the screaming. Before the nights when you couldn't tell a thunderstorm from a gunfight. Now, my world was quiet. I liked it that way. Chopping firewood had its own rhythm. So did breathing. I didn't need much more than that dot the axe bit into the stump, like it was chewing through bone. My breath fogged in the morning air, sharp as broken glass. Montana had its moods, and winter was always waiting just over the ridge. The cabin creaked behind me like it remembered pain. The land stretched out, golden and cracked, the kind of silence that had weight. Sometimes I'd stop mid-swing, swear I heard drums in the distance low, steady, like a heart buried under dirt. Probably nothing. Or maybe ghosts dotted had been. 9 years since I buried my wife. 7 since my son. That was the last time I stepped inside a church. I didn't cry. Men like me don't cry. We just stop. Stop laughing. Stop trusting. Stop feeling. I talked to them sometimes, my wife and son. Said good morning when I passed their stones. Said good night when the wind howled too loud. God, I fed. The horses, mended the fences, smoked when I remembered I had tobacco, which wasn't often. There was an old rocking chair on the porch with a crack in the seat that used to pinch Ruth's leg when she sat too long. I never fixed it. Some things don't need fixing. That chair sat empty now. Always did. Always would. People didn't. Come out here. The nearest town was a day's ride, and I'd only go twice a year, once to buy seed, once to pay taxes. When I showed up, folks looked at me like I was the ghost of something they didn't want to remember. Maybe they were right. I wasn't part of their world anymore. Didn't want to be. The world had changed since the war ended. The North won, but men still bled the same. The Indian wars were coolin', at least on paper, but they didn't tell the soil that. Blood soaked easier than water. The government pushed tribes off their land, herded them like cattle, made promises they broke before the ink dried. The Apache were fighters, proud and bitter. I respected that, even if I didn't fully trust it. Most white folk didn't want them anywhere near. I wasn't most. I didn't hate them. But I had scars. Some I could show, others stayed buried. In places no blade could reach. Men like me, frontier men, we had to be cautious. Out here, a mistake could get you dead, and no one would even hear you fall. That evening, just as the sun started bleeding into the hills, I heard the silence. Change, Dot. It wasn't a noise, exactly. More like the world took a breath and didn't let it out. I stood at the edge of my porch, wiping my hands on my trousers, and saw them, 10 of them. Apache. They didn't move. Just stood there on the other side of my fence line, like carved shadows. A woman near the front. Older. Strong posture. Her eyes didn't blink. Next to her stood a young girl, maybe 12, her hair braided with feathers and dust. Behind them, men lean, sunburned, some with rifles slung over their backs, others empty-handed but not unarmed. They watched me, not hostile, not begging, just waiting. I didn't reach for my rifle, but I knew exactly where it was. Behind the door. Loaded. I didn't need it. Not yet. The woman stepped forward. She didn't speak. Instead, she raised her hand, palm open, then closed it over her heart. A sign. Peace, maybe. Then she pointed to the barn, the hills beyond it, and drew a circle in the air. We need your land, she signed, slow and deliberate. My mouth was dry. I hadn't spoken to another soul in months. My boots creaked as I stepped down off the porch. The sky darkened fast, the kind of dusk that promises rain. I smelled it wet dirt and static. I looked back at my cabin. It felt smaller now. Not empty, just not enough. They didn't step forward. They weren't asking to come in. They were asking for protection from something worse than me. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded once, and the rain began to fall. One night, I muttered, barely loud enough to hear myself over the rain, "Barn's dry. Keep to yourselves." They didn't answer, just moved like ghosts past the fence. No one ran, no one asked questions. The woman led them toward the barn. I watched them disappear into shadow like they'd always belonged to it. I didn't light a lantern. Didn't want to see more than I had to. The next morning, I woke early out of habit. The barn door was half open. For a second, I thought they'd vanished, but then I saw the troughs clean. Tools I hadn't touched in months sat mended beside the shed. Even the door hinge that used to screech like a dying rabbit was oiled smooth. They hadn't touched a thing on the porch. Hadn't asked to come closer. Just worked. Like they knew what this land needed. Like they respected the silence it required. At night, I'd sit by the fire and look out the window. I could barely make out their silhouettes, curled together. Like a pack, the girl always slept in the center. A circle of backs and shoulders around her, like shields made of bone and skin. Wolves, I thought. Not just survivors. Protectors. The first storm came hard. Wind howled through the hills like a widow screaming for her dead. Snow slammed the valley sideways, turning the world white and soundless. I worked fast, latching shutters, double tying the barn doors. When I looked up, 3 of them were already helping. No words, no questions. One man covered the chicken coop with a canvas I'd forgotten I had. Another chopped wood, his strokes smooth and efficient. The woman same. One who'd signed to me nailed tarps across the hayloft gaps. By the time I circled back, my hands were raw and bleeding from a split in my palm I hadn't noticed. I sat down on the porch steps, holding the wound under my coat. She saw it. I didn't ask for help, but she came anyway, kneeling like it was. Nothing. She opened a pouch from her side and pulled out crushed herbs, wrapped in a strip of animal hide. She pressed it to the gash, tied it with something that smelled like cedar and smoke. I didn't flinch. She didn't look at me once. When she was done, she stood and nodded. That was all. Later that night, I poured whiskey into a tin cup and sat by the fire, staring into the glow like it held answers. My hand ached, but it was clean, wrapped better than any doctor I ever knew. I looked at the chair across from me and imagined my son in it. He'd be 23 now, maybe. Or buried deeper. It happened during a cattle run south of Tucson. Apache scouts, they said. Just a guess. The fighting was everywhere back then. No one really knew who shot first. My boy wasn't a soldier, just riding shotgun for a supply cart. He bled out in the arms of a stranger. That's all the letter. Sighed. For years, I hated the idea of dying alone. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe we all die alone anyway. Maybe it just matters less if someone else is breathing nearby. The storm lasted 3 days. The Apaches didn't complain. They moved through the cold like it was part of them. When I stepped outside, I saw fresh tracks near the barn. A snare. Trap was set along the fence. Clean, careful work. Inside it, a snow rabbit, still warm. I hadn't seen who set it, but I had my guess. He was taller than the others. Lean, broad shoulders, quiet eyes that missed nothing. Scar along his jaw, like he'd survived something meant to kill him. His name, I'd learn later, was Tall Wolf. But back then, he was just the tall one. He didn't speak. Not to me, not even to the others much. But he watched out the second night of the storm. I heard a voice rise in their circle. One of the younger men, angry, pacing. He kept gesturing toward the hills, then toward my cabin. Accusing me, maybe. Accusing them for staying. I stepped out onto the porch with my rifle over my shoulder, not raised. Just visible. Tall wolf stood between me and the fire. Then he stepped between the angry one and the others. His voice was low but firm. I didn't know the words, but I knew the meaning. Enough. They stared at each other like wolves caught in a standoff. Then the younger man backed down. Tall wolf turned to look at me. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but I understood. He'd taken a side. For now, we didn't say much to each other after that, just shared the silence. And in that silence, something settled. A man knows when he's no longer alone, even if he doesn't know what it means yet. The snow had barely melted when I heard the hooves. At first, it was just murderous travelers, passing near the tree line, eyes catching shapes moving on my land. Someone spotted the girl collecting eggs from the chicken coop. Someone else saw the older woman filling water from the creek. And word, like wildfire with dry brush, spread through the valley. The rancher wasn't just mad, he was harboring Apaches. They didn't come with torches that first day. They came with stares, spit on the ground, and muttered prayers like my land had turned holy. The preacher from Silt Ridge rode up on a pale gelding, dust covering his black coat like a second skin. He didn't dismount. "You've got devils on your land," he called out, hat low over his brow. "I buried 3 children last year, scalped and split like meat. And now I hear you're keeping their kind in your barn." I stood on the porch, hands on the rail. My rifle rested against the doorpost behind me. I didn't touch it. "Say what you came to say, Elijah," I said, voice like gravel. His lips curled. "You always were a proud man, Ethan, but pride don't shield you from the Lord's fire." He turned his horse and spat into the snow. "They'll be back," he muttered, but not with words. I watched him disappear into the trees, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir in my gut. Not fear, not quite anger, something in between. A signal. The wind shifts before the wolves circle. That night, I locked the barn myself. Tall wolf was already moving when I opened the doors. No words passed between us. The others followed suit, like it had been decided in a dream. We worked in silence, reinforced the shutters, dug trenches near the fence posts. The women helped bury supplies and hide the livestock deeper in the woods. The young girl Lena, I'd heard someone call her, helped cover the tracks. She was quick, smart. Her eyes missed nothing. I showed Tall Wolf the weapon stash I kept buried beneath the floorboards of my shed, 2 rifles, a box of powder, and a shotgun that hadn't fired since Ruth's funeral. He held it like it was sacred. We sat side by side under the eaves, cleaning barrels and loading chambers. The sky was bruised with dusk. Every click of metal echoed like thunder. "I thought I was done fighting," I said, not expecting an answer. Tall Wolf didn't look at me, just worked the lever of his rifle smooth and steady. "You just forgot how," he replied. Later, as the night curled in around us, a fire cracked in the pit behind the barn. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I sat with my back to the fence, the old coat wrapped around me like skin I didn't grow myself. The girl came up without a word, crouched near the embers. She held a stick and started drawing shapes in the dirt half-circles. A sun, a bird. Then she wrote a name, Caleb. I stared at it, frozen. She didn't look at me, just waited. "That was my boy," I said quietly. "He was about your age when he died." She nodded, and smudged the name slowly, like dusting a grave. The woman from before, the one who wrapped my hand, stepped forward. She held something small in her palm, carved pendant, round, made of smooth bone. She pressed it into my hand gently. I looked at it. A bird in flight, pierced by a branch, but still soaring. "Protection through sorrow," I whispered. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. She nodded. Before dawn, I smelled smoke, not from my fire. I was already on my feet when the torch arced through the sky, a flaming streak. That landed just beyond the barn door. The thatch caught quick, too quick. Yells split the airmen, somewhere in the dark. I shouted once, and the Apaches moved like shadows. Water, buckets, hands, shouts in a language I didn't know but understood. We got the flames out before the roof collapsed. No one was hurt. The girl was safe. The horses rattled their pens, but didn't bolt. I stood there, chest heaving, boots soaked through, watching smoke curl into the sky. I didn't need anyone to tell me. They'd be back. Next time, they wouldn't miss. They came just after midnight. I'd been awake. None of us had slept much since the torch was thrown. The moon hung heavy, loaded with silence. Then came the thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves. Fast, angry. Torches in fists, rifles, slung too loosely, like the fire in their eyes was enough to do the killing. 10 of them, maybe 12. Faces I recognized, men I'd passed in town, men who once tipped hats at me, now snarling like dogs drunk on fear. I was already on the porch, rifle in hand. Behind me, the door stood open, warm light spilling out over cracked wood and footsteps. I no longer walked alone. The first torch arced toward the barn. I didn't wait. "This is my land," I shouted, my voice rising from somewhere older than my lungs. And there under my roof, a crack of the rifle echoed like judgment. The torchbearer dropped. His fire went with him. Gunfire split the night. Muzzle flashes lit up the brush like lightning. Bullets hissed through the dark, splintering. Rails thudding into walls. One clipped the side of the chicken coop. Feathers burst into the air like smoke. Tall Wolf moved like wind, fast and silent. He fired from the tree line, dropped one of the riders clean off his horse. Another turned. Toward him, raised a rifle. I didn't think, just aimed and fired. The man's shoulder exploded backward. He dropped screaming. Then I saw Tall Wolf stagger. A shot had caught him. His arm hung low, blood trailing down his forearm like ink across canvas. He didn't stop, just switched hands and kept firing. 2 of the women rushed to pull the girl into cover. One grabbed a knife from her boot, slashing at a settler who made it past the fence. He fell with a cry, clutching his leg. I moved back toward the barn, eyes scanning the tree line. A shape darted near the shed. I waited until he hit the old trap I'd left. Buried steel jaws snapped shut with a wet crunch. The man screamed. Another dropped his rifle and ran. 3 of them lay still on the ground by the end. One crawled off into the trees, leaving a trail behind him. The rest fled, not a word spoken, just fear in their lungs. The silence that followed was a different kind of heavy. The barn smoked at the edges, not burning, but scarred. Holes peppered. The walls, the troughs were overturned. Blood stained the snow in ugly blooms. My hand shook. I couldn't stop it. The rifle clattered to the porch. Then I felt her fingers slip into mine. The girl. She looked up at me, eyes wide, not afraid, just there, like she'd always been. The others stood close now, not behind me, beside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the only soul on this land who had something worth losing. Morning broke slower than usual, pale and cold. I walked the long slope behind the ranch, where the wind met the trees. The place where my boy slept. The grave marker was simple, just wood and memory. I knelt beside it, brushing snow from the top with a hand that still trembled. Tall Wolf stood a few steps behind me. His arm was wrapped now, still bloody. "We won't stay long," he said, voice low, honest. I nodded. Stay as long as you need, I replied. This land's big enough for ghosts and survivors. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased just a little. Later, the girl came up the hill, holding a single wildflower she must have dug from under the snow. She knelt, placed it at Caleb's grave without a word, then turned and walked back down. I stayed a moment longer, listening to the trees. Then I stood, turned toward the ranch, and toward the sound of hammers. We rebuilt the barn together. Wood, sweat, scars. No one spoke much. We didn't need to. Some wars never end. But sometimes a broken man finds family where the world said none. Should exist? Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe peace can be fought for and sometimes earned.